Hi, I'm Mark Frost, a RUPS Growth Partnership Manager, and you're listening to the ForTheFounders podcast. This series includes discussion-based interviews with industry leaders from startup and scale-up companies. With digital technology vastly improving and changing the landscape, ForTheFounders aims to uncover the secrets and insights into how digital technology is impacting business growth.
Today's episode is from our most recent ForTheFounders LinkedIn Live event. This time, the discussion was regarding women founders, with the topic of the future is female. The discussion was set up as a chance to learn more from empowering women, to find out their backstory of becoming a founder and how they managed to set up their business to become a success within their industry. Our host, Chief Evangelist Mark Frost, talks to our panellists, including Carola Jonas, who is the CEO and co-founder of EVERTY, Jerrica Kirkley, who is the founder and Chief Medical Officer at Plume, and Sarah Hawley, who is the CEO and founder of Growmotely. I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today to the next ForTheFounders event, and I'm very pleased to introduce three amazing speakers. Just to give a little bit of backstory and context to today. So, following on the success of the last Tech for Good event we held in spring. God, it's summertime already. And the last discussion was around kind of the use of tech for good purposes. Now we've got a chance to learn from three empowering women, which are all joined with me, to find more about their backstories of becoming a founder, how they managed to set up their businesses, and to become a success within their industry. We'll also analyze the positives and the possible difficulties of being a founder within the current climate, and whether there are stereotypes and gender biases and what they have come across. So some really interesting topics will be covered today. I think what would be good is just to kind of kick off with a kind of a brief introduction, backstory, and some career paths. So in no particular order, Sarah, if you want to kind of kick things off and just introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. I am an Australian. You can probably hear from my accent, but I live in Austin, Texas now. I've been a founder since 2009. I've had 3 exits along the way, bunch of different companies, and most currently, I am working on Growmotely, which is a remote work platform. So we help companies anywhere in the world find, hire, and retain talent anywhere in the world. And I started that company after turning all of my other businesses remote back in 2014, and just enjoying what it did for me as a leader and for my team culture, and became really, really passionate about remote work. So I always also wanted to do something in technology. So this is my first tech startup. So lots of learning for me here, and I'm just loving the journey. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. Jerrica, introduce.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Really happy to be here. I'm Jerrica, and I am a relatively newer founder. I started my company Plume with my co-founder about 3 years ago. So my first, I guess, legitimate entrepreneurial endeavor, or at least on a larger scale. But we are the first digital health company dedicated to the transgender community. And so our mission is to build a holistic virtual medical home for the trans community. And I am a family physician by training, or perhaps as known as a GP by many in the audience today, or primary care provider. So that's my professional background. But I've always been looking to find ways to really radicalize the healthcare environment, make it more inclusive, and really think about providing amazing care for all people. And so, and I'm a transgender woman myself, and so have kind of been on both sides of the curtain, so to speak, in terms of taking care of a lot of trans folks through the years, and also having to navigate that journey myself. But yeah, really happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Carola?
Hi, I'm Carola. I'm the founder of EVERTY. We're a software company for electric vehicle charging. I'm a first-time founder, so this is my very first startup, and I'm enjoying the journey very much. It's much more interesting than all my previous corporate and government roles, I have to say. And obviously, when you run your own startup, you decide where your impact lies. And I was always very passionate about climate change. And if we want to preserve the planet for future generations, then we need to end up with zero emissions transport and renewable energy powering our cars and buses and trucks.
Superb. Brilliant. Thank you for all the introductions as well. And hopefully for the audience, that gives a little bit of context around the amazing people that we have on board today. And we will have a Q&A at the end as well. So do feel free to pop some questions in. I'll see those and we can save those for the end. But we have some fantastic questions, which I'm sure we're going to be some really insightful pieces. So I would love to kick things off with kind of understanding as women founders, how do you attract other women when recruiting staff? Would be really interesting to know. Sarah, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, sorry, you dropped out a little bit there, but you said as a female founder, how do we, I think it was just my end, not yours. How do we go about attracting women team members? Was that the question?
Absolutely. Particularly as now you've said you've kind of moved into a tech startup. Yeah. What do you feel you act as kind of a beacon to other women to kind of move into tech?
Yeah, I definitely think we do. And interestingly, in the remote workspace, it naturally attracts women as well. I think, and I hate kind of stereotypes and biases and stuff, but women have children, and so do men, but women typically have been kind of staying at home with children or putting their careers on hold, or doing some kind of sacrifice to their careers when they have children as a generality. And remote work actually really helps not have that happen, because they can work from home with the kids. Maybe like in my situation, my husband and I both work from home, so we co-parent together all day long, and we're lucky enough to have a nanny. But yes, to wrap all of that up, remote work tends to attract a really diverse pool of people, actually, from all aspects. And we have about 67% of our community in Growmotely identify as women. So, we naturally seem to attract more. And I'm sure being a female leader is appealing in some regards, but I can't speak for the people I hire. But yeah, I've tended to, this company, even in my internal team, is over 50% women. And it's not, it just is how we've ended up hiring. But it's important to me to have really high diversity within my teams for sure.
Yeah, we've just had some comments in as well. Savani, sorry, I hope I've said that right. She's agreed with you. She says remote working opportunities will definitely help attract women as well into the industry. So yeah, great that we're now kind of moving to, I guess, more of a hybrid and in some cases completely remote as your business. So fantastic. Jerrica, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the remote environment is really helpful for increasing diversity and inclusivity broadly when we talk about hiring. We think about this a lot. Our whole thesis is really looking at gender in a very expansive way, right? And increasing representation, especially in the healthcare environment, and access to healthcare. But we really take it to heart from a business standpoint as well, and how we're building a business. And so that I think it is important to have that lens, and I think, as Sarah said, like increasing diversity across all lines. But we know that there's gender inequity, and certainly exists in a we'll say kind of between cisgender individuals, but also trans individuals, right? Who might identify as female, might not, but also could be assigned female at birth, and still face a lot of the same issues, right? Who are maybe trans men, trans masculine, or non-binary individuals. And so I think from our standpoint, just really thinking of gender in an expansive way, and recognizing those folks, perhaps regardless of their gender identity, who have been underrepresented, and especially business and corporate settings, and healthcare especially. And so for our company, we're over 50% of the entire company is trans identified in some way. Of course, many of those folks identify as women or female, and I'd say 80% kind of LGBTQ identifying. And if you take the sort of women and or trans identified, probably pushing the overwhelming majority of the company. So definitely something that we look at, and I think is important to really build those opportunities and think about growth pathways for employees as they they come in and get developed and move on in the organization, which is great, or move on to other organizations and other roles.
Yeah, and I think we kind of made the point at the end as well. If you join a company they can then kind of pass that knowledge, and hopefully for a company with a fairly inclusive culture really adopt perhaps people who've come into an organization with kind of fresh ideas of how to do things differently. So I think kind of knowledge is power from kind of, you know, pushing your mission to a wider community for sure. Carola, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one important thing is really people who are applying for jobs. The first thing they obviously do is they go to your website and they look at who's in the management team or who's in the team. And if they can't see any women there, then they're probably not going to apply for a job. So we are also over 50% women. And we always get a lot of applications, even in the tech sector, from female programmers and software developers. And I actually the other day saw a job ad on LinkedIn by another clean tech startup. And they had this like power pose of like 8 men jumping into the air saying, "Yay, we're so successful." And they were hiring and said, "Join our team." And I just looked at that photo and I was like, this is absolutely wrong. Surely only men will apply for that role.
Yeah, it's not the encouraging image you want to see there for sure.
Yeah, that perception and showing the example is super crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what kind of a good lead question for that would be is for males and women looking to join a women-led founded company. You know, what are the attractions? You know, what can you see are the kind of the slight differences in terms of your approach, perhaps?
I'll throw in if you like. You know, I think what's really important is balance. And I love to think of it as energy, like masculine and feminine energy, not so much in a gender, or you could call it yin and yang, but the energy that exists within an organization, within a team, and within ourselves as individuals. So if we think of the feminine energy is nurturing, it's intuitive, it's an open channel, and it's receiving information, it's receiving. And then the masculine energy is more of this action, momentum, it's grounded, it's strong, and it's pushing things forward. And if we can marry both of those energies from a founder's perspective as the leader of the company, and also just within the company, we're getting this beautiful balance of allowing us to kind of intuit and receive information from the universe or whatever you might identify with, but just understanding, like listening to where the company wants to go, what the team is feeling, nurturing the team, listening to the energy within the team, and then taking action to bring things to fruition and bring them forward using that masculine energy. So I love to think of it like that. And obviously having a balance of men and women tends to help create that, but doesn't necessarily. I think it's something we need to look at within ourselves. But having that balance of men and women in the team, and just diversity in general around all aspects, is bringing greater perspectives into the organization, into the leadership team, and filtering that into the company. So we're not just operating in a single-minded way. If we look at like we're coming out of this patriarchy and really strong masculine energy potentially, which is very like forward-oriented, take fast action, move, push, but it can be quite singularly a singular experience, and that can be really intense as a working environment. If we can bring some balance in, you know, we create much more harmony within ourselves and within the organization. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I think.
No, it does. It completely does, right? Balancing anything in life is kind of key, right? And I think you kind of touched on some of those kind of nature and nurture points around potential kind of leadership styles that a woman would bring to the leadership team, right? And I think that's very important for a modern workplace as well. Was there anything additional beyond kind of what Sarah is kind of mentioning there you want to kind of touch on at all, or should we kind of move on to the next question? No,
nothing to add. Very well said. I think balance is the key for sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'd like to kind of go in more around perhaps some of the kind of the varied perks and benefits of kind of working for a women founder. I mean, in terms of kind of more planning around kind of sabbaticals, family commitments, post-maternity, is enough in the workplace now, or is there enough understanding of those kind of potential needs? Jerrica, would you want to kind of kick off in terms of your own business and experiences around those potential experiences that people have in their lives?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, again, a lot of this comes down to representation, right? And we know there's been a significant lack of representation when it comes to gender minorities, largely those who are women, female identified, or essentially not cisgender men, right? And who have taken up a lot of space and a lot of representation. So I think one of the advantages of joining a company that is led by somebody who traditionally has been underrepresented is it can, it can create some mentorship and some inspiration and understanding that, hey, like I can feel welcome in this place. But also there's potential for me to, to develop my own career and move into places that maybe in other environments didn't feel possible or even were told, was not possible. So to me, that's probably the biggest benefit when we talk about representation, especially in leadership roles. And again, that can span and should span all lines, but certainly applies for gender equity as well.
Super. Thank you. And Carola?
Yeah, I think it's like when we look at what the whole pandemic has basically shown us over the last 2 years, you can, in my company, you can work from everywhere. And we currently have like a couple of staff members being in different parts of the world, traveling, and they're still doing their work without taking annual leave. So I think that's especially like for a lot of women very attractive. I think the only concern, and I might be a bit like old-fashioned with this, is when I have it's around establishing new teams. So we hired quite aggressively, and I did not want to onboard them completely virtually. Like we've done that through COVID, and we've seen how complicated that at times was, and especially for younger junior members. And luckily, like they always say,
Oh,
we want to get to know each other and we want to come into the office. And so it's all about what we said before. It's the balance, like finding the right balance and bringing people in and creating that culture and that team and nurturing them, because I find nurturing over Zoom is very different to nurturing in the office in person.
yeah, and just going to touch on it. If it sounds like the audience are kind of feeling similar. So Yasser has put absolutely. Let me just find that one again. We've got another. Sure, balance is the thing that we need. Savina, it's very important to have teamwork. So in terms of, again, touching on balance, to support each other, encourage each other, as opposed to kind of singularity of seeing ourselves as opposition. So yeah, there's kind of a similar points across the board there. So we're going to move on to difficulties and bias. And I think this will be really interesting. I want to kind of touch on maybe some personal experiences, perhaps before you were, founders. Did you kind of growing up, did you ever have any male managers, projects, or different personas that you felt there was kind of clear discrimination against you? And perhaps that's allowed you to be open-minded in terms of your approach now as founders, and whoever feels strong about kind of a story that they've had with this.
Can't imagine that any of us haven't been discriminated against, to be quite honest. I still feel like privileged to be like born in Australia and a white woman, and there's a lot of privilege that just naturally comes with that. And it's an interesting question because I've been a founder since 2009, so I haven't experienced a ton of discrimination or bias in the last since then, really, because I was my own boss. I just did my own thing. I didn't really care what the rest of the world was doing. I just get on with it. But prior to that, I was actually on the board of my professional association in Australia, and I was the youngest and first female board member. And as our board term was coming up, we were nominating if we wanted to do another board position. And I had gotten together with one of the other board members, and we had decided he wanted to run for president and I wanted to run for vice president. We had a vision for what we wanted to do, and it felt really good. And so we expressed to the board that this is what we wanted to do. And the board seats are kind of voted in, but usually they're not contested. And anyway, I got a call from the CEO of the organization the next day saying, oh, look, this other fellow on the board actually wants to be the vice president. And so I'd really like to ask you to pull your nomination out so that he can be that role. And what we'll do is we'll make a role for you so you can stay on the board called Head of Women. And I was like, how about F off? And I'm just going to leave this. But that was a really hard decision for me to make, because I thought I am a leader in this industry. It was in financial services in Australia. And is this the moment where I'm meant to say, no, I'm going to still put my ring in the hat and I'm going to go head to head with this guy, and I'm going to campaign for my nomination, and I'm going to show other women what it's like? Or am I going to say, this is not aligned with me, this is not how I think the world should be, and I'm just going to step away from it? And it was a really tough decision. I ultimately decided to step away from it. I will also share that in this tech startup that I'm doing, we are a funded company. So this is the first time in my founding journey that I've been raising capital. And
this is something I was going to touch on as well. So I'm glad you kind of got to that kind of how you go around kind of funding and any prejudice there. So yeah, sorry, please continue.
So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because the prejudice is not direct, but when I look at who I am as a founder, where our company is at in terms of the traction, the timing, the size of the opportunity, and some of our other counterpart, other kind of businesses that are in a similar space, not necessarily, I don't really like the term competitors, I think of myself more collaboratively, but other businesses that are in the space that have gotten funding, I do at times scratch my head and wonder why it is so much more difficult for me. And it has been really difficult, not so much from my network of angel investors and people who know me. Absolutely, they've backed me. But once I start going out and talking to VCs and people that I don't necessarily know, I mean, it's definitely been really, really challenging. And I don't know for sure, but I know the stats. I know that only 2% or so of capital is going to women, even less to women of color, even less to transgender women.
Yeah, which is a like super marginal amount, right? We think about how much funds are going into kind of startups and VCs. That must be really tough to take. That kind of clear discrimination.
Well, it's hard when it's almost not clear either, because nobody's saying I'm not funding you because you're a woman, but you're kind of like, what is going on here? And just looking at the stats and the numbers, and then I think it's important for people to understand as well that roughly 50% of businesses every year are started by women. So we don't have and that's in Australia, the US, the UK. I can't say it globally. I'm not sure the numbers in every single country, but I do know that in those countries, at least, it's usually, 47% women, 52% women, one year to the next. It's roughly 50-50 businesses are started by women and by men. And so there's not only 10% of businesses are started by women. And the same could be, you could break that into every other aspect of diversity category that you underrepresented founders, basically. It's not that small of a percentage of businesses started by that group.
Yeah. And, people are inspired by others. And I think that something has to give, right? And I know you mentioned, the numbers of businesses started, but if they're clearly not receiving the funding to get their businesses where they need to be, women are kind of looking at you to be inspired. But if there's not enough of you, they're probably going to think, doubting themselves, or they can't do it. So there has to be change for sure.
There has to be. And there are a lot of funds and initiatives, obviously, and even like what you guys are doing, there are a lot of initiatives in the world now. And every single day, I just thank every woman who's walked before me to set the path for me to be in the place I am now, because it was a lot harder before and it's getting easier. And every single day when I say my gratitude to the women who have walked before me and everyone who's flown the flag for any form of diversity, I also hold in high regard my responsibility to keep doing that, my responsibility to go out and raise this money and grow this company and list the thing on the stock exchange and show people that this is possible as a woman, as an underrepresented founder. And I will do that.
Well said. Well said.
And I think Sarah just mentioned that unconscious bias. It's actually quite funny, or maybe it's actually not funny, but when I raised money last time, I called a female VC because I wanted to get information about another VC firm. And she basically then asked me who I'll be meeting with, and I read out the list of like 5 names. And the first thing she said to me was, Carola, you just read out 5 male names. Make sure you have a man in the meeting. Do not go in by yourself. And I was like, hold on, if that's the message you're giving me already, I don't even want them as a VC in my business. But that's what we're facing on a day-to-day basis.
That's shocking. I've got to say.
And the reality is the problem is so systemic that even for the funds that are female-led and are focusing on female or other underrepresented founders, they also can't get money for their fund, or not can't, but they also struggle to get money for their funds. So it's not just the VCs, it's not just us trying to get funding as underrepresented founders, it's also underrepresented VCs that are focusing on underrepresented founders struggle to raise their funding the way that another VC fund would. So it's like all the way back.
It's a chain. Yeah, absolutely. And clearly there has been a strong gender pay gap. Do we see this is based on specific industry? Depending on kind of what industry you're in, and what do you believe can be done to change this? I think this is really interesting. Jerrica, to you nodding away there.
Yeah, well, I think about, because healthcare is my background, obviously, as a physician, and it is interesting because I think there's probably certain profession specialties within healthcare that can be potentially harder to get in and stay in, depending on like the biases that are out there, right? And how we I think how we're like making laws and structuring society and creating gender roles, and even looking at things like, especially Roe v. Wade being rolled back here in the US, and how that it can impact I think one's ability to participate in different aspects of the industry, right? And some of those are going to be higher paid, especially in the physician workforce. There's certain specialties that make significantly more than other specialties. And you can say, oh, that's just a specialty difference. But there's underlying issues which dictate who can more easily go into those fields. So I think maybe that's just like a nuance within the healthcare world, where some of it can be, I think like a bit covered up by something that can just look, on the surface, not like a gender inequity, but then actually if you dig in a little bit, it can be. And there's probably similarities across other industries, but that's just kind of
I think so.
One thing that I've observed, and I know can perpetuate that.
Thank you. And other founders in your experiences?
Maybe I'll go next.
Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah.
So I haven't seen that yet in like my startup or this very early stage technology companies. And that's because in Australia, we have a absolute brain drain since COVID. We just can't get enough like software developers, and they can pretty much ask for any salary. And so as long as the people and the women ask, they will also get that their salaries in that sector. But I think what's also very important for startups is especially early stage startups that are not funded with millions and millions of dollars. There is a general pay gap between market rate and startup rates. And so for us as a startup who cannot match like the salaries of a Microsoft or Google or Atlassian, that's where we then need to come up with all these other benefits and the nurturing and the balance to really make that work and attract good women into the business.
Absolutely. That's when we start kind of talking around purpose over profit, the perks of the organization, that kind of feeling part of something, belonging, and I guess that's those the start of how you can kind of overcome that piece, for sure. Okay. Have you ever felt kind of silence in a work situation, like unable to speak up due to your gender? And I guess this is probably early stage of your careers.
Yeah, I mean, I shared my story of what happened there, and I think it's not necessarily just to do with gender, but just generally, if you don't look and feel the same as most of the people in the organization or in the room or in leadership, and they haven't gone out of their way to create a safe space for people who feel different to speak up, it can happen for sure. And I think that's really important for us here as leaders, and everyone who's listening, really, even if you're not in a leadership manager role, like, you are a leader as an individual, and to think every single day of, like, how am I creating a safe space for everyone to have their voice heard. One of the things I've learned to do as a leader, and I'm not always perfect at it, but whenever we're talking about something as a team, is really ask every single person, like, do you have something to say here? Do you have feelings or thoughts about this? And notice the people who are more quiet, because even just that can, some people are more expressive and outgoing, me being one of them, and other people are more quiet. So as a leader, if we don't notice that, we can have these more introverted people not speaking up. So I think there's lots of reasons that can contribute to not speaking up, and it's really important for us as leaders to make sure we're creating that safe space for everybody to have their voice heard.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I was gonna say I also agree with that, and I think been in at least for the last few years, a bit of a privileged environment, in the sense that, I mean, that's been our premise, right? Is building a space of that does feel safer and in a space of inclusion. But even with that being said, I've definitely been in rooms and in places where I've been the only woman or the only trans person, and seen other people taking up a lot of space in that room, right? And whether intentionally or not, but I think it's, again, a lot of this comes back to societal roles and gender roles, and what people have told they're supposed to be doing, or what they're not supposed to be doing, and that does show up. And I think we seen some comments in the chat questioning about privilege and things like that, and there is so much implicit bias and privilege that we don't even recognize, right? Certainly have that myself, and so I think that's always important to, like, take a step back and say, okay, right, where is this coming from? But yeah, I suffice to say, have definitely been in those moments, but again, kind of fuels the desire to really build a space where that's hopefully not the case for all people.
Yeah, definitely. Carola as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually, like, for industries where there is a clear gap or imbalance, let's say gender imbalance. I worked for a long time in transport and freight and logistics, so very male-dominated industry.
Yeah.
And they were fully aware of what's going on. And as Sarah said, like, in management meetings, they would really make sure that everyone gets to say and state their opinions. Whereas then in smaller companies, where everyone is a lot more homogenous, like, age-wise, and it's a small team, and they maybe don't even have a HR department, that's where you have management meetings where the loudest voice gets to, or the alpha male or alpha female steps in and takes over the meeting. So I think this whole, like, meeting culture and how you deal with it is very important to set up early on.
Yeah, great. And so how do you feel, what do you feel men can do to help women get into leadership roles or support women leaders? That would be my next question. So I guess thinking around kind of existing organizations, what kind of support networks they can kind of offer to do more.
Yeah, I mean, I think putting initiatives in place to encourage diversity is definitely helpful, probably, for especially bigger organizations. And I've never actually worked in a huge corporate, so I really can't speak too much to what it is, but it does seem like in some large corporates, there's some pretty big shifts that need to happen. And so it does make sense maybe to have some initiatives in place. But I think at like an individual level, and this really goes for all of us, is like accepting that we do have bias, and all of us, even if I've done so much work around this stuff and I'm so aware of it, I'm still going to have bias. And so constantly be looking at it and looking for it and looking to unpack it and understand, different people's life experiences, what they bring, what they don't, so that I can unwind those stories that exist in my own mind that I'm barely even aware of.
So we're talking around raising levels of self-awareness. Is that?
Yeah, just understanding. I mean, I think of myself as someone who's less biased because I've traveled to over 60 countries. I've lived in a bunch of different countries. I have worked to encourage gender diversity. Like there's a lot of things that I think that I've done, and that I could easily think that I don't have any bias. I don't have any whatever, but it's not true. I remember a story recently, a year or so ago, where I was walking past a person who was houseless, and they were walking toward me, and I felt myself scared, and I thought, should I go to the other side of the road? And then I caught myself and I was like, what am I scared? Like, when has somebody who is houseless actually hurt me? Or what experience do I have in my life where they're a threat? And I realized I didn't have any. And the irony was, as I walked past this man, he started laughing and started bowing down to me like I was a queen. And he was wonderful. And that was just a simple example of where I saw like, oh, I had all these stories come up of fear or judgment or whatever. And in fact, it was like a really fun experience that I had interacting with this person as I was walking down the street. So just knowing that, we all do have these biases, and looking for them and looking for where can I let go of these stories that I might have where I'm discriminating against someone without even realizing that I am. But when we know about them, I think definitely putting some initiatives in place to, change our focus as an organization.
breaking down conditioning, right? Of like, as you said with the homeless guy, your thought process initially gave you a certain viewpoint. You actually, when you broke it down, you're like, why am I thinking that way?
Why do I even think that? I have no past experience that this is unsafe. Yeah, I think, and I do think it's a really hard, the debate about should we have quotas, and, specifically, I think that's very hard. And like, obviously I, to some degree, believe in merit and people earning their positions, but also like we have to see there's systemic problems why people are not even in the position to be able to earn the position. So I think it's a really hard balance, but definitely looking at things like that, like where can we increase our representation? Because until we see women or transgender people or refugees or whatever like class of person we have to label people as, until we see them doing these amazing things in amazing leadership roles, we don't know it's possible. I'm constantly looking for evidence of people like me who are successful so that I can like know that it's possible for me. And so I think that is really important, to build diversity at all levels of an organization intentionally, so that we're welcoming more of that in, and people are seeing like this is a place where I can thrive and be successful.
Yeah, it does exactly that, right? When you create that diversity, it allows others to follow in that path. So,
and diversity could be age as well. Like, are we bringing in people of all different ages? Like, there are so many ways where we get stuck into like a train of a certain type of person.
Yeah, Jerrica, I just had a thought. What particularly for you, what can leaders do to help support transgender people in an organization? Is there a network for trans founders?
It's a great question. I think a lot of it gets back to what Sarah was saying. And, I think definitely the previous question you asked does apply to us all, right? We can all contribute to equity just as we can all contribute to inequity. And we see many examples of that. But, as far as specifically as there a network for trans founders, there are, I'd say, a couple of groups that have been kind of loosely forming. It's interesting. I think probably this is the case in a lot of marginalized communities, and the trans community especially. We've existed online in a big way for a long time, right? Because we haven't had safety in physical spaces. And so there are a lot of informal networks. I think one of the neat things about doing the work that I'm doing is I've had a lot of people, a lot of trans people specifically reach out and say, hey, like I, work wherever, or maybe I'm a founder, or, a leader in a business or executive, and trying to navigate that. And so there's been a lot of informal networks that have been created. And I think one of the things that we really think about is how we're bringing people into the organization, right? And of course, you're always looking for all those different things along the lines of skills people are bringing to the table, and what you want to see in your company broadly. But where you're recruiting from is really important, right? I mean, Sarah mentioned these, forms of oppression that are baked into our systems. Well, if we go through traditional recruiting methods, you're probably gonna, see the majority representation, right? So looking where to recruit, I think like one specific example, groups like Out in Tech, who are particularly putting together, queer and trans individuals, and providing that space of growth and development and access to opportunity. So there's a lot of different forms you can recruit from. Again, from many different lines of diversity and representation, that might not be where you typically would go, or the typical firms you might partner with when it comes to recruiting for your industry.
Interesting. Yeah. Taking a more of a broad, out of the box approach to your recruitment methods. Nice. Okay. Brilliant. Carola, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the best thing that men can do is just be aware. As Sarah mentioned, we all have biases, and it happens to every one of us, not only men. But it's interesting, especially when we look at investing in startups, and there are a lot of investors who say we don't treat female founders differently to male founders. Yes, you can believe that, and it's probably their honest belief. But then looking at the figures, it's just not true. If women only get 2% of the funding. So I think, it's just really being aware every single day that we have biases and that we need to fight against them or bring them out and into the open and recognize them.
Yeah, great. And this is quite a unique opportunity. We've got three women founders on this conversation. So for others listening, what advice can you give to women who are trying to perhaps make their own startup or get into a leadership role or start their careers? Like just some top tips.
Well, the best thing about being a founder is that you just get to live life however you want to live it, and you don't have to worry about the rules of society for most of the time. I mean, you find yourself like I am now with capital raising coming back into some bits and pieces there, but that's what I love about it. And just knowing that becoming a founder really opens your eyes to the fact that, or open my eyes anyway, to the fact that I am the creator of my own destiny, and that every single thing in this entire world has just been made up by somebody somewhere along the line, and you can make stuff up as well. So my tips are not being afraid, and stepping into entrepreneurship and founding a company is really about letting go of, the right ways of doing things and the perfect, trying to get it right and follow the rules. It's actually about creating new things, creating new ways of being. And so, don't be afraid, know what your vision is and what you want to do, and just get after it. And,
nice.
Don't try to make it perfect. Just get after it and learn along the way.
Great. Really positive sentiment. Love that. How can we top that? Anyone else? Well, not about topping it, but yeah, just add to that.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think this idea of, Sarah was noting, one of the enticing things about being a founder is you do have this freedom to a certain extent to build the space that you want to see in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's been really incredible about the work we're doing at Plume. Of course, the patients we're serving, but again, like where we're working, and there are always edges, there are always confines. I think of any kind of corporate environment, but there is a lot of bandwidth to really reshape that, and think about how can it be different. so that is, I think one of the really empowering and neat things about being a founder. One thing that I, just as far as like an advice or tip, I think finding mentors is so helpful, right? We talk about how it can be sometimes challenging to find mentors who might have the lived experience that you have or share your representation. But when you can find those, really take advantage of those moments. And I can think of many incredible mentors through my life, everything from college to medical school to residency training, to now being an entrepreneur and working in that environment, who have been incredible women or trans people, and that can go a really long way. So I think finding those mentors can be really helpful.
Nice, love the mentor piece. Yeah. Thank you, Carola.
Absolutely agree with mentors, and I think the other thing that founders or potential future founders should look at is also their own personality and their risk appetite. So you have like some founders who may sit on some savings and they just say, okay, I'm quitting my corporate job and I give this thing a go and I go hard or I go home. And then for me, it was completely different. I actually transitioned from a corporate role into like freelancing and consulting, and realized very quickly that with 2 or 3 days consulting work, I could make as much money as I did in the corporate world. And then from there, I was like, oh, well, if that's possible, then maybe I can also do the next step. So for me, it was a very gradual slide into entrepreneurship, but everyone's different. And I think it's just like finding out what personality type you are and how you want to go about it.
Sure, nice. So I feel like in summary, there's an element of don't be afraid to perhaps break things and try new things out. Don't be too risk averse. Find yourself kind of mentors, and just have a positive attitude to try something you believe in. And perhaps on this topic as well, of if you feel like you've kind of faced certain biases, be that beacon to make the difference. Is a nice way, I guess, to kind of hopefully summarize some of that. So we've had some awesome questions come in, and I appreciate there's been tons of comments throughout where they've kind of people in agreement of certain comments that have been made as well. But I'm just going to kind of reel off some of the Q&A pieces that I think are really good. How can we look to expand women's networks to accommodate all women entrepreneurs? Perhaps is there something you guys that you're doing personally, or what can be done? Maybe Jerrica, you were talking around kind of from a digital space, in terms of maybe some networking online, in terms of forums and groups and communities. Is that something that we could go down that angle?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an angle. There are a lot of both formal and informal networks. Looking at underrepresented founders, especially women identified founders and other groups. I think those are helpful. Again, I even think like how we're building our companies, right? How we're recruiting, how we're really focusing on growth and development of our employees. Because ultimately that gets to the groundwater issue, right? There systems of oppression in place that have prevented this. And so to change that, it's like we need to fundamentally change the system and thinking about who are we hiring and who are our leaders and how we're even thinking about leadership. And so, I mean, that's ultimately, I think, what changes it. But yeah, having network opportunities can be very helpful. I think even just having these conversations can be really helpful, right? Because they're not always had in many environments. And so, so that's a big part of it. But yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I really like the point where you touched on about the kind of the recruitment piece, because I feel that has a knock-on effect of empowering other women friends or underrepresented to actually join companies. It creates other opportunities for others. So that was a really good piece you talked around kind of the recruitment element as well. I really like that.
Yeah, and I think just thinking of the cycle, I mean, Sarah mentioned this before, but it's like, it's one thing to have, let's have, women founders and executives, and then, VCs, and you just kind of like have to keep going up the levels, I think, to really make it a virtuous cycle. But all those pieces are important for sure.
Brilliant. Yeah. And we have another question is, where did you all find your inspiration? Like, I think that's a really interesting question. So what inspired you?
I can go if you like.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
So what inspired me, when I was 18, I randomly was on the phone to a girlfriend who had moved to London from Australia, and I don't know, I must have been just feeling whimsical, and she was like, "Why don't you come over here?" And I went and booked a flight and left 2 weeks later, and it was the best. It was all feels like divine intervention in a way. Like, I'm just so glad that I did that, because I came from, a pretty low socioeconomic situation. I barely graduated high school. I couldn't get into any college or university, and the way that I saw the world was pretty small at that time. I really only knew like the city that I was in and the people that were in my immediate sphere, and I did not have very high hopes for myself, because nobody in my world had very high hopes for me. And this divine intervention that saw me go over to London and work and travel Europe, and I spent 6 months away and I visited 15 countries or something like that. It was like the biggest eye-opener for me of this big wide world that was out there, and anything and everything that was possible. And that, I think, just served as inspiration for me, because I went very quickly from, just trying to get a basic job and create some security and safety for myself that was very limited thinking, to, oh my God, there's like so much out here, and I don't want just that. I want all of it. Ever since then, I've just been pushing boundaries and getting outside of my comfort zone, and lots of people inspire me, and lots of books, and, too many to name, but it was really that moment in time that made me see, like, holy shit, I really could create anything for my life. I really can do anything. And so now I seek out other examples of that through books and mentors and all of that.
Yeah, because you seem very worldly in terms of, drawing in inspiration from tons of sources, and obviously well-traveled. I personally, I don't believe in overnight success. I think it takes continual consistency, but actually what you're saying is there was a kind of a pivotal moment. That trip did kind of open your eyes up to...
Yeah, there was a pivotal moment, but it's not like I became who I am. There was no overnight success.
Yeah.
It was a lot of years of work and pushing
But that
myself, and
what I is like, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think success is, I constantly redefine that for myself, of like, what does that actually mean for me now? What does that actually look like right now? So I think that's important for other people to think about as well. Is like, success is a very personal thing, and it shifts and evolves as we as individuals shift and evolve.
Completely.
And I think you naturally, like, you start setting the bar higher and higher for yourself. I mean, if I look at what I've achieved with EVERTY so far, could basically say I'm a successful business owner and operator. But now I'm saying, well, what does success mean? Like, is it when I sell the company, or when we list on the stock market? And so you're always like chasing like new goals anyway. And as a founder, you always think you're not doing enough and you're not fast enough. And I think you really just need a bit of stamina to stay in that game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, I mean, gosh, so many inspirations. I think a lot of people, I mentioned mentors before. I can think of so many. I think broadly, inspiration to getting into healthcare, for me, it was really, I don't know, I always felt a deep empathy for those that were suffering. And I wanted to try to find some way to make an impact there. Many ways that you can do that. For whatever reason in my brain, being a doctor, working in healthcare made sense for me there. And so that was really what got me into it in the first place. And I think having traveled a bit, and of course you don't have to go far, right? You can go in your backyard and you can see many people who are suffering and don't have access, or don't have the same access to healthcare specifically that other people do, and wanted to find a way to really bring high quality healthcare to as many people as possible. And through a roundabout way, and I kind of ended up having an opportunity, again, having a mentor in my medical training, to really focus on providing care for the trans and gender diverse community, and really open my eyes to the gap in care that existed. And so that's what ultimately inspired me to dedicate my career to finding ways to close that gap. And Plume has been one one aspect of many different things that I've done in that world. But I think one moment in particular when I was in college was part of a program, and the motto was "Think Big," right? And it was really certainly a program that embraced inclusivity and really allowing anybody to take that notion of thinking big, and always thinking like, okay, what more could I do with this, and really relating it back to me as an individual and of course my own growth. So yeah.
Brilliant. And do you feel like that's what continues to inspire you, every day?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's being in the entrepreneurial world and the startup world, it kind of becomes the ethos, right? It's like, okay, well, we're doing this now in a single state. Now we're doing this in 50 states. What else can we do? Where else can we do it? And again, gets back to really anchoring, of course, in my world, on access to healthcare. But yeah, for sure, I think that thinking big always resonates with me.
Yeah, what I noticed, when we initially spoke around kind of doing this piece as well, all your organizations seem to have like a very positive effect on the world. And, I guess you can draw upon businesses where you're inspired by helping others and creating other opportunities for or helping the planet. So, it's nice to see organizations with a real positive outlook as well. So,
but maybe if I can just add to that, and inspiration may not be the right word, but you see a lot of startups and businesses being created through solving their own problem. And so at the time when I started EVERTY, I was keen to get an electric car, but I had street parking and there was no charging infrastructure. And so I've basically set out to solve my own problem. And a lot of founders do that, whether you call that inspiration or motivation or like just the cause of like how you get to where you are today.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh, I feel like the inspirational piece is probably a nice high note to kind of to wrap up on, and I think people can draw a lot from that kind of that inspiration and the points that we touched on today as well. But yeah, if anyone has any kind of extra questions, feel free to send those across. I'd perhaps share those in personal email. But I think unless you all have any additional questions or points you wanted to add, I feel like that's a good place to kind of wrap up.
That's great. Thanks so much for having us, Mark. It's been really
amazing.
fun. So great to meet you both, Jerrica and Carola.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, absolutely. And please connect with the speakers on LinkedIn so you can stay in contact as well.
Thank you for listening and being part of For the Founders community. Make sure to follow me on LinkedIn and visit our website to keep up to date with our live events and latest interviews.